Me when to go.
Okay, Melissa, thank you for doing this. Are you okay with us sharing this recording of your story publicly?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Can you or anyone that you may mention during your story get in trouble or face legal prosecution due to anything you may share in your story?
No.
Sweet. Okay, it's all you.
All right. So my name is Melissa, and I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict in recovery. My sobriety date is 2/23/1998. I got sober when I was 21, and I'm almost 45. So I've lived more of my life sober than I had drinking. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my experience, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. So I was born to an alcoholic. My mom met my dad in a bar, and she needed a ride home, and he gave her one. She was 22 and he was 19, and she liked him, but he didn't like her. So they slept together for a while, and when she found out she was pregnant, he gave her money for an abortion and left. And I think that dug a hole in her, and she just continued to drink and use drugs and find men that weren't kind to her and abusive to her. And through that, she had me. I was a young girl, lots of different boyfriends in and out. I had a strong foundation with my grandparents. They took me, and I had a couple aunts that were really helpful to me, my family. So I think they saved me. My life at home was tumultuous. I'd wake up in the night with my mom gone, in the backseat of the car while she was at the bar. Lots of abusive boyfriends. I am actually writing a book about my story, so I don't want to give away too much, but a real tumultuous upbringing. And at 6 years old, we escaped from one of her violent boyfriends. I started my third first grade school. We'd moved 3 times that year. And she met another boyfriend, and we moved in with him. And they'd met at a bar. So that was from when I was 6 years old until 25 years after. They stayed together that whole time. My mom was never married. And he turned out to be a drug dealer. So we had people in and out of our home selling drugs. And I grew up rolling joints and knew that there were pot plants in the closet and selling weed. And I'd still never met my biological father. I knew that he had been incarcerated for drugs. Someone had narked him out, and he had he was a coke dealer. So he was in prison, and I wanted to meet him. So as a young girl, 7, 8, 9, 10, I would look for him in the phone book. I knew his name. I would look for anyone that had that last name. I found out when he got out of prison, the place that he worked. I would call and ask if he was there. And when they went to get him, I would hang up. And so when I was 15, I met him, and he had a wife and a Harley business, and he was sober, and he looked like me. And I was so happy to have met my real dad. And I met new grandparents, new cousins, new family. I got out of my mom and her boyfriend's abusive home life, and I was in 10th grade at the time, and I started just hanging out with my dad, riding on the back of his Harley, and they bought me things, and I felt seen and heard for the first time, and they helped me, through high school, they helped me get braces. My teeth were really crooked, just all the things that I needed. I needed to be seen and heard. I'd been abused most of my life. So him and I became friends, is the best way I can say it. And my senior year of high school, a girlfriend and I went to California for our senior trip. And I was 17 and she was 18. And by then, I'd been drinking and using drugs, mostly mushrooms, acid, weed, drinking a lot. But I hadn't yet tried cocaine or meth. So we went on this trip, and we met the guys in the hotel, Motel 6 in Anaheim. And they pull out a shoebox, and it's full of coke. And for my whole life, I'd said, I'll never do drugs. I'll never drink. I don't want to be like my mom. I don't want to be like her boyfriend. They're losers. I hate them. Why are they so stupid? They fight all the time. I'm constantly calling the police. I'm scared out of my mind, watching them fight, think he's going to kill us. All of the terror that goes with witnessing domestic abuse. And that shoebox of Coke came out, and I had no reservations. I snorted as much as I could. We went out to the pool. I felt like I owned the place. I walked into a bar at 17. Nobody carded me. I just felt better than I'd ever felt in my life. So fast forward, the next day we meet our neighbors in the Motel 6 upstairs, and they introduce us to meth. So we're using Coke and meth and having all kinds of experiences with these guys in the hotel. And we make our way home. And before we even get our swimsuits off and get into the house, we jump in her car and go look for the Coke dealer in our town. And I should say I grew up in about a half an hour south of Seattle, and not the best area. So we had a lot of friends that drank and used, and we knew where to access drugs. So we get to the guy's house, and he says, "Nope, I'm not going to sell it to you guys. I'm not going to sell you Coke." So we're defeated. We go back. My battery's dead in my car. I call my dad. He comes to pick me up, and I say, "Dad, I used Coke for the first time." And he's like, "Next time you need to tell me so I can get you the good stuff." And so his addiction, he'd been a Coke addict. He'd been sober. He'd been out in prison. He was out now. His life was turned around. But me saying that ignited his addiction again. And from then on, he's bringing me Coke and meth, and we're using together, and we're buddies, and we're smoking it. And we end up in crack houses smoking crack. And he's my drug partner. And I come home from being out, and he's, giving me lines, and I'm selling for him. So he hands me packages, and we're out at Harley parties or bars, and I meet women in the bathroom and hand them the package, and he gives me some as a reward. And I was pretty depressed and suicidal through that. And so I quit my job and went to work for him, and we had a falling out. And a few years later, his house got condemned, and he had a meth lab and went back to prison. So he went back for 6 years. I got sober, and our lives went separate ways. But after that time he got out of prison, after those 6 years, he ended up getting sober, and he died with 10 years sober. So he did, it was too late, but he did end up clearing up his life. And then just real quick, I'll tell my alcoholic mom about 12 years ago, moved to California. She'd been sober. She actually got pancreatitis. I had taken her to treatment. She tried so many times to stay sober, but it just didn't happen for her. And she was in a recovery house and met this guy and moved to California. And then a year later, I got a call that she'd been found in a hotel room dead from alcoholism. So that was when she was 55. So both my parents, mostly died from drug and alcohol-induced reasons. Even though my dad was sober at the time, they just abused their bodies so much. Same with my grandparents. And so I come from a long line of suicide and mental illness, alcoholism, drug addiction, abuse, domestic abuse. And for me, at 21, I got a DUI. I knew I didn't want to live this way. I couldn't see what was different about my life and my mom's. I had an abortion in high school with my meth-addicted boyfriend. I was in my own abusive relationships, and I hardly graduated high school. I didn't know what to do with my life. I didn't see how I could break this cycle. So the DUI ended up being a blessing. I had to go to 2 years of outpatient treatment. In Washington, they have a law that if you do a deferred prosecution, you don't get in any more trouble. They'll let it go off your record, but you have to do some kind of treatment, and you have to admit you're an alcoholic. And so I did that. I said, what's the worst thing that can happen if I have to stay sober 2 years? And so I stayed sober about 3 weeks, and I drank again. And that was my last drink. It was not a good night for me at all. And it's just like the same thing always happened to me when I drank. I just couldn't stop, and put myself in a lot of precarious situations like we do. But I had to go to AA 2 times a week. And so I'd already been in AA for a little bit, and I went to them and I said, I went out for a work function and I wasn't going to drink, and I promised, and I had a friend with me, and she said she won't let me drink, but everyone was dancing and having fun, and I didn't know how to just like be. And so I had just one, and one led to me being in a van in the middle of the night, not knowing where I was, my nylons ripped and everything just like off my body. And that's what always happened. And I showed up at that meeting. I shared about it. They said, come back next Sunday. We need you to help us chair the meeting. And they gave me a job to do. And they said, just don't drink in between this Sunday and next Sunday. Can you do that? And I said I would try. So I did. And that was 7 days. And I made it to that Sunday. And I just kept doing that every week. I would just show up back to that meeting. And I had to go to other meetings too. But it's true what they say about meetings, like the little things that you hear in the meetings, you relate and you resonate, and then you drink again and it just, something clicks. Something clicked for me, luckily. So I met a guy in AA, and I had met him previously out partying, but I met him again in AA. I said, hey, do you remember me? And he didn't want anything to do with me. But we started hanging out, and with 8 months of sobriety, I got pregnant. And we quickly got married. And I was 3 weeks before my due date when we had our first son, and he's 21. And so me and his dad are both sober, 23 years, and our 21-year-old has never seen us drink. So it's pretty incredible. And this kid's had a completely different life, than we had. Both of us, he was a heroin addict, and we both had our own, trials in our childhood that we'd run from. So that's the pride of my story, just my parenting and my journey to that. Throughout my recovery, I'm now remarried, and my ex-husband's remarried, and neither of our partners, have seen that part of us. The best part about my sobriety has been learning that, like, I never thought I'd be a mother. I never thought I'd have the ability to nurture another person. And through my recovery and the people that I've met and like the role models that I've found, I've been able to naturally have that instinct. I just had it. And so through parenting, I found love that I needed when I was a kid. I didn't have that, but through my own children, I've been able to just like find that love for my inner child. And so most of my recovery was pretty good. I'd gotten divorced, remarried, had another child. And then in 2017, my husband and I decided to move from Seattle to Minnesota to be closer to his family. And so I had almost 20 years of recovery. I thought I should be doing well. I drove a BMW. I was a teacher. I looked the part. I'd gone to college and got a 4-year degree. What's wrong with me? Why am I not okay? I have these emotional outbursts, reactions. I yell. I punch things. I peel out of the driveway angry. Like, what is wrong with me? And we moved all the way across the country to be close to my in-laws because I didn't have family. And I felt like I'm an only child. My parents had passed. I felt like my son needed more. And we get there, and these people are so nice and gracious and religious, and they've been married 50 years, and they grew up in church in this small town in Minnesota from Seattle. And I'm like a liberal vegan. Like, I just did not know how to be in a family. And so I'd show up at Thanksgiving and I'd show up at Christmas, and I'd have to leave early. I'd have anxiety, and I didn't feel like I fit. I felt like an alien. And I ended up just crying all the time. And I'd wake up in the night journaling and writing and praying and just feeling so out of place. And I ended up finding a book called Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I read that book, and I cried and I cried and I cried. I read it in one day. And I realized that I had emotional trauma. And I think trauma was a word that I hadn't heard. And I'd been in a lot of therapy. And every time I went to therapy, they gave me medication for anxiety and depression. And I took it. But a lot of my life, those sobriety years, I was kind of a zombie because I was drugged. And I'd look at my diet. I would try to exercise more. It was just like I never got to the root of that childhood trauma. And so in that book, it talks about, the laundry list traits of a child who grew up in an alcoholic or dysfunctional home. And I had them all. And I felt seen and I felt heard. And I'm like, this is my problem. This is the root of my problem. And so I cried and I read that book and I thought, there's no way there's a meeting here in this small town. And there was. And I showed up and I heard other people talking about the abuse of their childhood and how that affected them. And I finally was able to share some of that shame and those stories, and how I just try to protect myself and show a different persona to the world than how I felt inside. I thought they knew how poor I was. They knew how abused I was. They knew the names I'd been called and the shame, the shameful things I had done. And so I was trying to cover it up, but I still felt it. I still heard their voices in my head and the lies they told. And so I went to those meetings. So it's only been about 4 years that I started working a program in adult children of alcoholics, and it saved my life. I'm off meds. I'm able to have tools to breathe when I start feeling that anxiety come. I'm a big proponent of just meditation and yoga and stretching and breathing and mindfulness and getting to the root, which for me is journaling and prayer. And I'll just talk a little bit about when I went to college, I took a class called Food and Mental Health. And I stepped into that class, and it was taught by a naturopath. And she showed us all these videos about what food and ingredients do to our minds and our bodies. And we watched Forks Over Knives, Food Matters. We watched about the animal agriculture industry. And I had no idea. So I knew that dairy wasn't great for you. And, 20 years prior, I'd done some research and had stopped drinking milk for a time, just little things. But this lady educated me, and I started juicing, and I started looking at my diet and nutrition. And I had good habits, but they weren't the best. And ever since watching those videos, so that was in about 2011, I stopped eating meat. And then when I moved to Minnesota, I watched a documentary called What the Health, and I went vegan that day. And it'll be 4 years in August, but taking dairy and meat out of my diet has been super instrumental for just overall health, digestion, elimination, all of that, energy, skin, everything. So now it's important to me, and it always has been, but I just take a look at every day, what I'm eating, what I'm putting in my body. We don't eat sugar. I don't do caffeine. Obviously don't do alcohol. But it's been baby steps. I don't want anyone newly sober to think that this is what they need to do either. I smoked, I ate fast food. I did all of that, and I just didn't drink. And that's really the important message, is just don't drink, and all the rest of this will come. But now I can say, with 23 years sober, I've been able every year probably to give something up that was a crutch for me. I don't like waking up groggy and needing something for fuel. I like to just wake up and exercise or work out or get my energy in a natural way. So it's been vice after vice after vice. And I definitely spent my time in Debtors Anonymous. I'm an impulsive shopper. I spend money to feel good and buy things to feel good. And I have to be accountable with my finances. I have to be super careful about what I spend money on, because the more I get, the more I want. And just with anything, I've done the 12 steps, in AA, doing the 12 steps currently in ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And then the 12 steps apply also to Debtors Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous. There's so many things that they can benefit, we can learn from. And most importantly, working with another person and telling that person your ugly truth. Because the best thing anyone ever said to me was, I'm sorry that happened to you. Or, I understand. And it just for alcoholics and for addicts to feel heard and validated is huge. So basically, that's most of my story. I will end there. My life today is nothing like it was before I got sober. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I am writing a book. It's called Let Your Privates Breathe. And it's a memoir, and it tells my life story. And I have a writing page on Facebook called Let Your Privates Breathe, Melissa Stussy. And let's see, my Insta is at Mel Stussy. And I have a website, melissastussy.com. So yeah, hopefully my book will be out the end of this summer and I'll have pre-sale, and I'm looking forward to that. That's been huge for me. I also write articles on Elephant Journal, and it's easy to find me in Melissa Stussy on Elephant Journal. So I started writing articles just since July. I've written about 90, and they're all about alcoholism, sobriety, veganism, emotional reactions, adult children of alcoholics, emotional wounds, all kinds of things. So I hope you find me there. Thank you.